Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka the Movie Mystic. If you enjoy these film reviews, then please press the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay in the know. Subscribing to this channel means you get to watch the coolest new film industry interviews, hear some groovy film reviews, and get some live streams too. Number 29. I enjoyed the concept and experience of Scary Moment at Night. It's about a man and a woman who happen to be walking around the same part of the city at night, but the woman believes that the man has ill intentions. She certainly has the correct instinct, but this man is presented as gentle, and we get his mind narrated throughout this quick affair that he is worried. She thinks that he wants to do something that he does not want to. It's a neat idea for a short and develops nicely. So while it might be a simple gimmick, it works for a short film and is proof that voiceover narration can be effectively cinematic at times, despite some people not believing in it. Number 28. The French movie Winter Boy is sort of a traumatic watch to match the subject matter about a teenager going through a phase after the death of his father. So it was like a lingering headache after getting hit by a blunt object. Perhaps I prefer to be gutted with the shape and precision of a blade, metaphorically, while watching a movie instead of what I got here, which is a lot of rawness, but lacked the Gallic refinement I expected. The moaning, sexual destruction, and arguing between the two brothers left me more annoyed than engaged. However, the mother, played by Juliette Binoche, was the best thing in this movie. She is always a wonderful performer. I just wish the other cast members had her subtlety and performance. But on a positive note, it is always fun to see France captured in a movie, and Paris remains to be a city that lives in my imagination as much as my memory of physically being there. I hate being too harsh on the movie as well. It does have a meaningful story, and there is a dedication in the end, indicating that our teen protagonist is an expression of a similar thing that the director went through. The movie has a fair amount of slickness visually, and the script is pretty good. It's just the acting here that kind of drove me nuts and wish it was over. But it's still a fun time to see what Europeans are up to with the movies. Number 27. Project Wolf Hunting is kind of a nighttime with beer movie you want to watch, but I was bombarded with it over coffee starting before 9 a.m., making the experience not ideal, to be perfectly honest. Perhaps I should have done the Midnight Madness audience experience for this, but I did what I did. It's a story with a maximum security group of prisoners being transferred on a high-security boat ride, and lots of people die. Everyone in this is gross, near one another, mostly get killed by this World War II zombie project who accidentally gets reanimated. So if you want high-octane violence, perhaps from Asia, this is your flick. The violence in tight spaces is something else. It overwhelms you. It overwhelmed me, and I would like to test my theory that it works better at night because it was a little too much for me in the morning. The creature looked weird to me, too. And I wish they had sprinkled these high doses of violence a little bit more so we could get to know the characters being killed a bit better to be invested in their eventual death. So while I do like this sort of movie, and even this movie itself, it was a little much. The violence is fun to watch, but it's like a sugar high that sort of burns you out. But then again, I'd be curious to watch it again, having experienced it once already. Number 26. There are things to like in My Sailor, My Love, which has beautiful scenery from Ireland to show off, good camera work, and good acting. You can see some slickness all around this elderly love story that has its appeal. It reminds me of Ordinary Love, minus the celebrity factor of Liam Neeson, but it more comedically looks at the elderly Irish couple and also messes with your perspective a few times in the storyline. There's the daughter, the cleaning lady turned love interest, and the dad. They are the central characters, but there is friction at points from all of them to one another. But it essentially has the bickering daughter and father shift as the correct perspective. That was neat, but this movie will likely be a dullard to most young audiences, and it's a little quaint for my liking too. But I also don't know what to suggest for this kind of movie not to be. Ordinary Love is a little too fresh in my mind to fully accept this movie as original. But it isn't a ripoff. It simply exists within cinema, and I have happened to attend many film festivals where I have been lucky to see lots of movies. So, if you're reading this and are a lot older than me, I'm 35, maybe it'll be for you, as it does shift around in an interesting way. It also possesses a lot of good filmmaking, but otherwise, skip this one. Number 25. The Blackening is an essentially funny movie that has elements I like and elements I don't, but in the end, it is a film to wrestle with. Despite not being great, it has some things you probably will remember for some time after seeing it. It is a comedy horror, not a horror comedy. It is deconstructive yet still vulgar fun that requires a high amount of pop culture knowledge to appreciate the irony we get within the story and many of the characters. It looks at what it is to be black with a nearly all black cast in a horror movie that is ultimately a comedy of manners as well as expectations. So if these things never occur to you and you don't have a lot of pop cultural knowledge, this exercise might confuse you. I feel comfortable calling it an exercise as well. If everything is concerning other movies, then this is an experiment for perhaps more movies of this type with these creators. So while there are some funny as well as memorable moments, it is not entirely cohesively competent. I thought the romantic storyline packed a lot of punch without being a comment on anything. It is sprinkled throughout the thread of violence and is what I remembered more than the creative use of violence or pop cultural references. I thought the reveal of who the diabolical villain ends up being was pretty funny. The character here is a great spoof of an all-time favorite old-school black TV star who deserves even more love, in my opinion. Who that is will only be revealed to you by watching this flick. Number 24. I'm a fan of Ben Kingsley, especially in Sexy Beast. Also, Salvador Dali is someone whose work always trips me out, so that means it's great. So the idea of Ben Kingsley playing Dali initially seemed like a lot of fun to me. Then I remembered that I don't like biopics because they seem to monopolize the Hollywood award seasons, making everyone who does an impression of someone we know, the public knows better than actors who depict original characters. To me, movies featuring original characters are more special than characters who existed in literature or real life beforehand. But in Daliland, it certainly starts fun despite establishing a trope I dislike in biopics. That is the story of a young man who gets to provide a role in older, well-known figure's life, so we, the audience, can explore them like The Last King of Scotland. But the New York party scenes are a lot of fun. Ben Kingsley does a really good job here, but I lost nearly all interest in the story after the New York storyline ended, and we go to France to learn more about art forgery. The indulgence of the movie held the most interest to me. The movie has its faults, but it is a fun, slick, competently composed piece of cinema that lacks some surreal rawness or departure from expectations. If you've seen enough movies, you can guess this one out. Number 23. Venus was hyped to me by TIFF Midnight Madness programmer Peter Kapowski as the Euro horror movie to look forward to during the Toronto International Film Festival of 2022. And I have to say, it was a lot of fun. It was also the perfect nightcap, having successfully recorded an interview with Nicolas Cage on the red carpet for Butcher's Crossing. It was fun to watch a horror gangster movie while the endorphins had me feeling wonderful. The movie was directed by Jaume Palagoro and produced by Alex de la Iglesia. And I have to say, it sort of reminded me of Day of the Devil. Both that one as well as Venus deal with the occult in a crazy scenario that at times can be funny. Day of the Devil is more a straight comedy than Venus, but there is humor tied to a supernatural menace in the movie that is tied to something more relatable. They both use the occult as an interesting plot device. Venus is fun, violent, anxiety-inducing gangster horror content that I was consistently captivated by without ever being quite mind-blowing, so it is a solid genre fare without being a distinguished classic. If you're celebrating a moment like I was, Venus will be good for you. Would I also assume my reading of it is a very solid genre entry without being a cult classic will be where you are with it. So if you're a horror fan, you should give this a watch. Number 22. I don't understand the short film Diaspora, but certainly experienced it, feeling its cinematic texture in my mind through references to some of my favorite films and television of the last 5 years. The Harbinger tells the story of a demon who comes into your dreams to erase your existence, which goes beyond your death. Your memory is erased from everyone who ever knew you. Twin Peaks will return, and with time traveling to stop a murder, but after the return, the timeline is reversed, and people go by different names with different life experiences or memories of them in their same body. In Diaspora, the beginning has a level of comfort with African Americans who then seem to vanish into an ether of we don't know what, because that's what semi-menacing white characters tell our protagonists. I don't know how it works or what it means. I can simply compare it to two other challenging projects that jump into a vortex and challenge linearity as well as coherence in us, the audience, to an interesting effect. Number 21. Coming from Kenya to Toronto this year is the short film Baba, which is simplicity at its finest. Not only is it a quick 15 minutes of watching, but the story as well as acting are quite low-key, letting something pleasant to settle in. The beach location is unbelievable. We see it twice in the short that is completely cut off from everyone and everything, making it an enviable place for us to recharge our human batteries to face the high-paced speed of life. Baba is a day-in-life story focusing on a child and his relationship with his family in a few scenes that are moderately paced and filled with naturalism that should work for you if you like the sights of Africa as well as good filmmaking. Number 20. I'm a big fan of VHS and VHS 2, even more. But after VHS viral, I told myself this must be where the series starts to suck. So I skipped out on VHS 94. However, after interviewing TIFF Midnight Madness programmer Peter Klowski last year, I got excited for VHS 99, partially because the great hip hop producer Flying Lotus directed this segment, but also just heard about the series' new general direction. So it started as one thing for the first two movies, and had a rough bridge to the next two. Now, having seen the fifth in the series, I see that while this is not as good as it was, it is still quite good. I don't think I'm being nostalgic. I do think the first two films here are better, but maybe 10 to 15 minutes in the feeling of comfort came in, and the movie became entertaining for the remainder of the time. The look feels different, but that's okay. It is a lot better than the viral experience. If it is very good, it does not need to be mind-blowingly good. The look and feel are noticeably different, but ultimately the entertainment factor is what matters. Eventually, I will check out the fourth movie in the series, and Peter said they are already making or have made the sixth in the series. It's one that I'm glad found its mojo again, so mission accomplished. My faith is restored. Number 19. In 2019, I was on the red carpet interviewing creators, including Nick Cage, attached to Color Out of Space. And it would be the last red carpet I would cover until 2022, when I would return to talk to Nick Cage once again, this time for Butcher's Crossing. It is a Western set in the 1870s, looking at the buffalo hunting business. Nick Cage's character takes a weird crew of men to Colorado to get a massive amount of fur to sell, and they end up camping out for nearly a year. This movie was written to be a return to normal form for Nick Cage, but it is not. The movie is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of aggression as well as an insane performance by Nick Cage. Nick Cage is a movie star. I can always default into caricature, which is no problem at all. If that two-dimensional form is interesting, there's no point trying to fix a wheel that is not broken to begin with, at least financially. I like actors who are always crazy, or in a particularly interesting way, from the movie, and it is what we get from Butcher's Crossing. If you like what you've gotten from the movie star lately, you'll be happy. Otherwise, you won't be. It's no Mandy. It doesn't stand out at all, but its slick competence is something that I enjoyed throughout. The other actors are good without being a distraction, and there is interesting information about buffaloes during the end credits. Number 18. War Sailor develops into quite an emotionally brutal film by the last scene through the lens of what could have been, or what was taken away from someone. It is a World War II movie with some action, but mainly people talking to each other. One man is a family man, then his friend is a charming vagabond type who is lucky enough to sit on family time, so quite a deep bond develops before being sent off to battle. We know what they both mean to one another. They get separated on a brutal mission with some violent scenes that I would describe above all else as uncomfortable. Then they both believe the wife and kids seen earlier are dead. Everyone thinks everyone else is dead in a bleak movie. They turn out to be all alive, but the vagabond gets home earlier, and the family man, believed to be dead, has his family in jeopardy while he is gone. They think he is dead, so a new patriarch comes into the family. The family man is discovered years after the war to return to this. He struggles to find a place in this dynamic, and then snaps, taking back what he created, unfortunately, leaving our vagabond friend further adrift. The last scene sees them as old men in their 70s, in the 1970s, trying to express their feelings toward another, but they aren't the type. So they kind of quietly, awkwardly, but still touchingly whimper to each other, knowing what their lives were. Number 17. It is always exciting to see the winner of the Palme d'Or at TIFF, as I have never been to Cannes, but know my experience seeing Bong Joon-ho's introduction to Parasite is enviable. And I also loved seeing Shoplifters here in 2019. Titan was a legendary screening too. I enjoyed it so much that I purchased a poster of the movie to have laminated and then put on cardboard to show off my adoration to whoever comes to see me at my spot. I knew that Triangle of Sadness won this year, had a Woody Harrelson in it. It was being called a sharp critique of the uber wealthy, but I refuse to read too far into it or even see a trailer, which is a new ritual I have for things I am excited to see. As a premise, it is interesting. I like the critique of consumer culture, modeling culture, and the critique of elites seemed on point at moments, then a little drift, and not as sharp as I would have liked to see at other moments. The evil rich are conveniently Russian. There's a mixed message on whether Marxism is the correct course. But I don't need to be on board with that. It just seems like a millionaire critiquing billionaires. The movie is a little too long, pretentious, meandering, and annoying. Some things like the heavy metal montage didn't work for me, but the opening part and much of the yacht material was entertaining. Number 16. Charcoal is the directorial debut of Brazilian Carolina Markowitz, and it is quite a raw debut. It takes place in the country looking at what happened when a poor rural family takes in a drug dealer on the run. That rawness comes in the form of yelling, judgment, anxiety, growing up as a child, being subjected to this garbage. I asked Carolina if it was ever hard to be subjected to this emotional material, and she said it was hard every day. No wonder. I imagine editing this movie would be similar on one level, editing an amazing yet tawdry slasher. Charcoal is dramatic material, but the sheer amount of negativity here would drain any artist. I personally like the realness, though. Carolina also told me one of the characters is based on a strong woman she really knew. So that explains to me the authentic factor this movie has. It seemed like it came from somewhere real. Brazil is tough, and I have seen some tough movies as well as miniseries from there, but this one was particularly brutal on that emotional level. So I feel like it is adjacent to horror. Just call it a horrific drama. If you're ready to be shattered, this movie will do that to you. But it also elevates with a relatability that comes from authenticity. I can recommend this movie, but only to a certain type of viewer who happens to be in the mood for something hard. Number 15. The Umbrella Men ended up being the ultimate pre-afternoon shift movie for me that day. This is not me saying it's the best movie ever. It's just my mood and its style synced up in a way that can only be described as serendipitous. It is a South African comedic caper, which is all about a good, lighthearted time, like a mellow jazz tune played while you sip a cup of tea on a peaceful Sunday morning. I don't know if this means I'm mellowing with age or maybe become more open to this type of movie. It's got the romantic element, politics insofar as that it is set in South Africa, and there's a greedy white baker who we don't mind seeing potentially getting robbed for the sake of a community. It's breezy stuff, and I mean that in a good way. After a workout and before a shift, I don't want to watch something like Cannibal Holocaust adjacent. I usually want to see something that'll put a smile on my face. This is that hype it up as solid conventional cinema that may not need a second viewing, but if you want a Louis Armstrong song in the form of a movie, then you will be good to go. Number 14. If I was going to pick another movie to do a double bill with Weird, the Al Yankovic story, it would have to be The Disaster Artist, as they are both biopics on wacky creators and are both fun to watch instead of being overly detailed history on their subject. Weird really stretches how wacky a biopic can be, and I get it. That is trying to convey the tone of Weird Al. But I don't know if it entirely works, at least. It could have been stretched back to some sort of emotional realness a bit, in my opinion. It's not a movie I want to revisit too many more times, or perhaps at all, but during that screening, I laughed throughout, especially in the beginning. I do think that Daniel Radcliffe did a good job here. Weird Al was never my favorite comedian or musician, but heck, I grew up with him, so it was a nice feeling to see him honored or congratulated in the form of his own disjointed but funny biopic. There's enough to like here to recommend watching it at once, especially if you grew up with Weird Al. You must acknowledge him specifically and his authenticity, even if he didn't make a track with Blowfly. Also, if you need proof that Daniel Radcliffe is more than just an actor who played Harry Potter, you should check this one out because the man captivated me early in the film. My disinterest grew more from the writing than from his performance. Number 13. The slasher Sick lands mostly well in 2022 and wouldn't have been released the year before, I think. Maybe not, but the jokes might not land as well as this movie makes fun of some people's attitudes towards COVID. Some of this anti-COVIDian thinking is a little knee-jerk, constantly ridiculing masks, but it's sometimes hysterical. A woman tries to escape from murder, but can't initially get let into a car because she isn't wearing a mask. I would feel terrible unlocking the mystery for you, but it is so funny, I laughed, as did many people in the audience, and it makes fun of the neurosis behind the last 2 years instead of suggesting it's all a hoax. It was also written by a screenwriter, making this 80-minute ride almost always gripping, with killers who have a great look as movie slashers. There are a lot of fun, creative kills you can get in Sick. I like the actors, I like most of the jokes, and I like the action. So this is really one of the most competent films here at TIFF in the Midnight Madness category. It'll be fun to follow the outrage as well as fandom that this movie will receive from the public. This might be as good as Hollywood could get for a genre movie at the time. It's right behind The Harbinger as my favorite COVID movie, although this one really goes after the narrative, unlike any other film I've seen before. Number 12. I love movies from the Philippines, from Wen Wang to Eddie Romero. These creators have provided me with some of the funniest moments I have seen. They may not be the best in my opinion, but they are funny. So, with that comedic lens on, Let Her Will Never Die, a new movie from the Philippines, provides laughs and a realness with characters that are really into 80s action movies from their country that play in the background for a while. Then they become a vortex and a movie within a movie. The changing visual aesthetic is fun. There are funny characters and a good story, but great visuals here. So, since we are talking about moving pictures, that should work for you. I love the main lady in the movie, and she has done a lot of theater in her country. It's great that she is finally getting the love from the Toronto audiences for her lifetime of work, since she is bringing that experience to the table here. If you like weird movies, not necessarily any Romero movies, you'll like this one too. The director is not really into all that stuff. She just remembers growing up with the local action movies played on TV growing up. That sense of not being able to place something with name of actors or titles to the movies here is fun. There are images we grew up seeing on TV that aren't clear enough to look up on the internet, but we still remember them. Number 11. I really enjoyed the hippie affair that is the movie North of Normal, a telefilm movie that once again is part of my reshaping for previous narrowness from years before that Canadian movies are only allowed to be produced a certain way. This story is about a man who takes his family away from civilization to live in the woods. Then eventually his daughter leaves with her boyfriend as well as with her daughter she had at 15 to try to assimilate back into society. It tells the story chronologically going forward with the daughter and mother being the focus, but some flashbacks are filled in with some dramatic details and show previous boyfriends the mother had. The sheer chaos goes to show you can have a fun drama with laid back characters that is wild stuff without showing nudity or violence. So kudos to the filmmakers for making this a very entertaining movie. I like the tension between the mother and daughter, despite it being mainly a loving relationship. It has fractions that kind of flare up and down in a way that entertained me, but also let the movie earn its more dramatic moments. A serious look at liberating attitudes in a dramatic movie made for an interesting experience. And I was also interested in learning during the end credits that this is based on a true story, which is believable, but somehow still surprised me. Maybe they seemed like such good movie characters, and I was transported into the experience. Or perhaps it's just hard to believe that there are lives that were lived like this. It would be interesting to know more, but check this one out for sure. Number 10. The End of Sex is a very funny movie coming from Canada, starring Emily Hampshire and Jonas Chernick as a somewhat troubled married couple who have the kids away for the week, but must reconcile their sexuality. That is, their lack of sexuality. While they're a good pair of parents, they are a weak pair of lovers who must figure out something going forward to keep the family unit together, or else they might split up. They do various things to spice things up: a threesome, sex on ecstasy, cheating, and a visit to a swingers club, which is all fun stuff, but nothing really adds that spice. It is more just gross for them, so new conclusions come in at the end. I got to interview Jonas Chernick back in the depressing days of 2020 in a movie that I found to be funny, but this one was very funny to me. And while I liked him talking to him then, now it is clear that he's a very good actor. Emily Hampshire is very funny too. They seem to be having a lot of fun with their roles, and who can blame them? I used to dump on Canadian movies, but over the past year have fine-tuned my respect dial for them. So, my opinion on the industry is more subtle, but I would think it is safe to say that this is a wild movie by Canadian production standards, and I'm so glad this sort of movie can exist within the industry. Number 9. It should be noted that it is not a regular thing for me to watch new Turkish movies yet. Through my relationship with the Berlinale, I managed to get some screeners for a couple of them. First, there was Brothers Keeper in 2021, which was quite a brutal story about a totalitarian-esque boarding school for boys. Then, in 2022, there was a documentary about the music scene amongst Turkish immigrants in Germany called Love, Deutschmarks, and Death, which is also quite a tough watch, while completely enlightening. I was happy to interview both directors, but this time I am simply giving some thoughts on Anatolian Leopard, which played during TIFF and even won an award, the Fabrisky Jury Award. Now, it must be said that this is easily the best out of the three. I like the mentioned films, but this one has a lot more slickness and some distinctively noticeable cinematic competence where you can't always place how it's done better. It just seems like more seamless storytelling. In terms of tone, it is lighter, but allows a deeper focus on what seems like a happenstance story of people dealing with zoo animals. That allows the material to become more relatable from a humanist angle rather than directly dealing with lots of suffering. Number 8. Alice Darling truly defied my expectations. I won't lie. I thought this was going to be a boring movie or somehow rub me the wrong way, but that was certainly not the case during the viewing experience of this. Anna Kendrick usually does comedies, so that is perhaps why, but she does have range. She's a better actress than I was giving her credit for, and now I feel like a jerk for being so off in this case. Anyways, the movie is about a woman and an abusive relationship. There are signs at first, but since it is from her rationalized perspective, it is cleverly and gradually revealed what is happening here. You and the women here are fantastic. They have a nice good cop, bad cop routine going on, and I found them to be very memorable in their roles. And we have a pretty solid bad guy boyfriend here to watch. The truth is, women are better identifying with the leading men than men can identify with the leading woman, simply out of necessity. There are not as many movies with a female protagonist and perspective. With age and a degree more of maturity, I have made some progress in this regard as a viewer and am more satisfied with earthbound dramas with female perspective. This movie worked for me as a drama. Number 7. The movie Thunder takes place in the year 1900 in Switzerland and is a very intense movie, broodier than I expected it to be, despite the write-up on TIFF's site saying it drew a bit of inspiration from Pier Paolo Pasolini. It's about a switch in a 17-year-old girl's priorities after the death of her sister. She goes from religious devotion to having the idea that constantly doing orgies will spread the devil across her land as she feels awful. It reminds me of the movies in the Seven Films Naughty Nuns box set, which are tawdry films to be certain, but also quite profound in the depiction of the friction between a religious ideal and being tempted by carnal sin, quote unquote. The dramatic friction isn't always tawdry. You can see it in the prestigious film like Black Narcissus from the 1940s, but throwing in the wild sex scenes is going to help your movie in the 1970s onwards framework, so we get plenty of that in Thunder. I loved how crazy this drama was. It's a nice balancing act, which you could expect from a European movie. We get plenty of violence from Hollywood, yet they shy away from profoundly sexy stuff with their beautiful actors. I'm not sure if most people will view Thunder as classy or trashy, but I'm all for the blurring of that distinction. To me, the question should be, is it worthwhile art or not? And to me, it is quite clearly a worthwhile project. Number 6. I enjoyed seeing the mostly Montreal set movie Coyote, as I recently spent a week in the city during the Fantasia International Film Festival this past summer. So seeing the Metro and having a familiar feeling made me smile. This movie could have been set most likely anywhere, and I would have enjoyed it as a drama about normal people with normal stakes that stays engaging without ever having to rely on any form of sensationalism. The scenes flow together, the relatable story is structured well, and the acting is wonderful because of the clear, concise directions, which will make you engaged throughout the entire movie. If you like this sort of thing, I saw it on a Saturday morning, the day after leaving my job for the past 6 years, and I had to say my mindset was very positive going in, but a great horror movie would not have been the appropriate movie for the moment this one was. I do not have much more to say about this movie. It tells the story of people working regular jobs, with regular family issues, and living in the country I am also in. So it all felt familiar, but that is part of the trick, perhaps. Or maybe just everything looks like fun in a movie. Number 5. Chan-Wook Park is certainly one of the most exciting directors working in Asia. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is lots of fun, but Lady Vengeance is even more profound of an experience to me. And of course, there is his classic Old Boy. I love The Handmaiden too, and his throwback movie, which makes me smile, is Joint Security Area. So it was a thrill to see him come on the TIFF stage after being introduced by Cameron Bailey. As for the movie itself, called Decision to Leave, I might have been unfortunately too tired to fully engage with it, but that's not saying it isn't really good. It is really good. It's a romantic noir as advertised, which should be a win for you in terms of genre. This cop is kind of twisted. He's very sexual, and the mystery of the crimes layered within the story is revealed in a fascinating way that should keep you intrigued throughout the 2 hours plus watch time. It's cool that Chan-Wook Park has went away from doing movies directly like Old Boy, which would probably work for him perfectly fine. But it is more rewarding that he stepped into a more sexualized lane. The Handmaiden was wild stuff in that regard, and this one continues in that direction and will not quite hit those high notes. It is more of a mellow or subtle composition of a story. In my opinion, a little bit more inferior to. Number four, the German submission to the Best International Film at the Oscars for the year 2022 will be All Quiet on the Western Front, a movie about trench warfare during World War One, where 3 million people died on a battlefield that would barely shift. This, to me, is like a great metaphor for World War One, which I believe to be incredibly senseless. While we can root for the Allies in the plethora of World War II movies, the wretched colonial system imploding is hard to get animated about. What was terrible was the loss of innocent life that was essentially cannon fodder for natives of the lands owned by aristocrats whose time was nearly up. Saving Private Ryan is famous for the D-Day Normandy opening, and I would say much of this film is a brilliant visual representation of the unmoving trenches. There was a big budget to play with here, and the trenches have never looked like this before. Certainly, 1917 is a phenomenal movie too, but its one-shot concept perhaps underplays the narrative construct that, to me, ended up being metaphorical of the larger experience. It was a lot of fun to cover the red carpet of All Quiet on the Western Front, and the movie is just as good as a war movie could get in my mind. So if you have Netflix and are a war movie buff, then this is an essential watch. Number three, it is quite likely that I will never be able to be objective about Steven Spielberg's autobiography in the form of a movie, which is The Fabelmans, because right before the screening, we were told the press conference for the movie was to follow. That meant I was in the same room with the esteemed Paul Dano and Seth Rogen, then a titan of cinema, Steven Spielberg. So it was quite a special way to experience this interesting expression of youth. The character who's supposed to be a young Steven Spielberg is named Sam Fabelman. So we see him grow up with his sisters, as well as being raised by his parents, played by Michelle Williams and Paul Dano. Seth Rogen is Paul Dano's best friend in the movie, and the kids call him Uncle. We see the family happily established in New Jersey. They moved to Arizona because of Mr. Fabelman's work. Then it ends with another relocation to California. So you see Steven Spielberg's first cinematic experience as a kid. Then it ends with him getting his first job on set as a young man. You learn about the joys and struggles of the Fabelman family, giving you an interesting new perspective on Steven Spielberg himself. It has one of my current favorite directors playing a legendary golden era director, and Spielberg said during the panel that this conversation is word for word what happened, but a lot of stuff is amplified for the movie's sake. It really pulled at my heartstrings throughout, and the theme of the movie is captured by the carny uncle who warns Sam pursuing life as an artist will make you nomadic, a gypsy alone in the desert. It will rip your heart out. Number two, I almost didn't watch The Banshees of Inisherin, but thankfully I didn't because it was one of my absolute favorite movies of TIFF 2022. After all, we get the In Bruges team reunited: Mark McDonagh, Colin Farrell, and Brendan Gleeson. This film is not that, though. It is a simple story that isn't simple filmmaking. It is more distilled in a primal way. It's set in 1923 on a small Irish island where a small change one day has a cosmic impact. Colin Farrell plays a simple-minded farmer who is best friends with the simple yet more pensive and musical Brendan Gleeson. But within the first 10 minutes, Brendan Gleeson's character states he is no longer friends with him. This leads to confusion and then a vendetta. It is a beautiful downward spiral to watch, with a great cast, beautiful locations, excellent score, and writing that goes from mundane to mystical in the development of any given scene. A lot of the movie is about people walking around in Inisherin. There are no banshees there, but an evil-looking mystical woman character can make sounds close to one. She's like a witch from Macbeth, I thought. I like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, but I love this one. I love that this Mark McDonagh movie more than anything else he has done since In Bruges. It's got beautiful broodiness within a movie which ends with a mushy middle that'll haunt your day in a good way. Number one, Broker seemed to be a controversial movie during TIFF 2022. Some people thought it sucks compared to director Hirokazu Koreeda's Shoplifters, and some people thought it was better. But I think it fits nicely within his filmography. Broker certainly is inferior to Shoplifters, but not by a significant degree. Both movies, as well as Like Father, Like Son, fit into an original thematic trilogy of films that question what a family unit is. They all seem to stress that family is who you spend the most time with instead of being related to one another biologically. We associate certain directors with certain things. So this is no different, despite being quite specific. The movie is different for the Japanese director Korida. The setting is South Korea, and Son Kang-ho from Parasite fame is in the primary role, playing a guy who lets people drop off babies at his business to sell them on a baby black market to prospective parents. It's such a sinister thing. The more time we spend with the crew, we get to know and like them. It somehow took until now for me to realize human babies are the most beautiful creatures in the world. There's a lot of beauty to be found in the film. It moved tremendously near the end, charmed me in the first half, and entertained me throughout. So it was my favorite film at this year's festival. It was my favorite film of the year.